The wind howled across the Montana plains like a wild animal, and Ben Morrison knew this storm was going to be a bad one. He pulled his hat down tight and rushed to get the last of his cattle into the barn before the real fury hit. His boots splashed through puddles that were already forming in the dirt yard of his small ranch. "Lily, come inside now," he called to his 4-year-old daughter, who was playing on the porch with her wooden doll. The little girl looked up at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother, and his heart squeezed tight like it always did. 3 years. It had been 3 years since his wife died bringing Lily into the world, and Ben still felt like he was drowning most days. Running a ranch was hard enough when you had help, but doing it alone while raising a little girl? Some days he wondered if he was fooling himself thinking he could make it work. The ranch wasn't much to look at. Just a small wooden house that needed a new roof, a barn that leaked when it rained hard, and about 50 head of cattle that were more trouble than they were worth most days. The bank letters kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. Ben tried not to think about what would happen if he lost the ranch. Where would he and Lily go? What kind of life could he give her? Lily barely spoke above a whisper these days. She used to be such a chatty little thing when she was younger, but something had changed in the past year. She would sit for hours, just staring at the faded photograph of her mother that sat on the kitchen table, running her tiny fingers over the glass like she was trying to reach through it. Somehow, the local doctor said it was normal for children to go through quiet phases. But Ben worried. He worried about everything. Was he feeding her right? Was he teaching her what she needed to know? Should she be around other children more? The nearest town was 15 miles away, and he couldn't afford to make the trip often. As the storm grew stronger, Ben secured the last of the animals and made sure everything was tied down tight. The wind was picking up something fierce now, and he could see lightning dancing across the dark sky. This wasn't going to be just any storm. This was the kind that changed things. He scooped up Lily and carried her inside, where she immediately went to her favorite spot by the window. Even at 4 years old, she seemed to understand that storms were serious business. She clutched her doll close and watched the lightning with wide eyes. "It's going to be okay, little one," Ben said, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "We've weathered storms before." The house shook as the wind slammed against it. Rain started coming down in sheets so thick you couldn't see past the front yard. Ben lit the oil lamps and made sure they had enough wood for the fire. If they lost power, they'd need to stay warm. The storm raged for hours. Ben tried to distract Lily with stories and games, but she seemed more interested in watching the lightning flash across the sky. She was such a serious little girl, so different from other children her age. Sometimes Ben wondered if she understood more about their struggles than he gave her credit for. Around midnight, the worst of it seemed to pass. The wind was still strong, but the rain had eased up some. Ben was just thinking about trying to get some sleep when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Over the sound of the wind, he could swear he heard someone crying. He went to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first he couldn't see anything. Then lightning flashed again, and for just a moment, he thought he saw something near the old oak tree at the edge of his property. Something that didn't belong there. Ben grabbed his coat and the strongest lamp he had. "Stay here, Lily. Don't move from this spot, you hear me?" The little girl nodded, her eyes wide with worry. Ben hated leaving her alone, but if someone was hurt out there, he couldn't just ignore it. The mud sucked at his boots as he made his way across the yard. The crying sound was clearer now, definitely human and definitely in distress. As he got closer to the oak tree, he could make out what looked like the remains of a stagecoach, overturned and smashed against the tree trunk. His heart started racing. Stagecoaches didn't usually come through this way, especially not in weather like this. The driver must have gotten lost or been trying to take a shortcut when the storm hit. That's when he saw her. A young woman was lying in the mud about 10 feet from the wreckage, unconscious and barely breathing. Her dress was torn and dirty, and there was blood on her forehead. One of her arms was bent at an angle that made Ben's stomach turn. She was hurt bad. Ben knelt down beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak. She was alive, but she needed help fast. He looked around for other passengers or the driver, but she seemed to be alone. Miss, can you hear me?" He shook her gently, but she didn't respond. Her face was pale as moonlight, and she was shivering despite being unconscious. Ben didn't hesitate. He scooped her up as carefully as he could, trying not to jostle her injured arm, and carried her toward the house. She was heavier than she looked, and by the time he reached the porch, his arms were aching. Lily was still sitting by the window when he came in, but her eyes went wide when she saw the unconscious woman in his arms. "Is she dead, Papa?" "Lily?" whispered, the first words she'd spoken all day. "No, sweetheart, she's hurt, but she's alive. We're going to help her, okay?" Ben carried the woman to his own bedroom, the only bed in the house besides Lily's small cot. He laid her down gently and lit more lamps so he could see what he was dealing with. Her head injury looked serious, but not life-threatening. The arm was definitely broken, though. Ben had set broken bones before on cattle and horses, but never on a person. Still, he knew the basics. He found some old boards that would work as splints and tore up some clean cloth for bandages. Working as carefully as he could, Ben cleaned the blood from her forehead and wrapped the head wound. The arm was trickier. He had to set it first, which meant moving it back into the right position. Even unconscious, she moaned when he did it, and he had to stop twice to steady his hands. Finally, he had her arm splinted and her head bandaged. She was breathing easier now, though she was still unconscious. Ben found an old leather satchel that must have been hers, thrown clear of the wreckage. Inside were some letters and official-looking papers. By the lamplight, he read enough to learn her name, Rebecca Ann Crawford. The letters were addressed to someone named Thomas Harrington in Cedar Falls, about 30 miles east. The papers looked like some kind of contract or agreement. Ben's heart sank as he realized what he was looking at. This woman was a mail-order bride, traveling to marry a man she'd probably never met. The storm had thrown her off course, and now she was lying unconscious in his bed with no idea that her whole life had just changed. He sat back in his chair and looked at her face in the lamplight. She was pretty, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair and delicate features. She looked like she came from money, or at least from a better life than anything Ben could offer. What was he supposed to do now? The nearest doctor was in town, but that was a hard ride in good weather, impossible in this storm. And even if he could get her there, he didn't have money for a doctor. The woman needed care, but Ben was barely keeping himself, and Lily fed as it was. He made a decision. That would change everything. He would take care of her here, at least until the storm passed and she was strong enough to continue her journey. It was the right thing to do, even if it meant more mouths to feed and more problems he couldn't afford. Looking back at Lily, who had fallen asleep curled up by the window, Ben wondered if maybe, just maybe, this storm had brought them exactly what they needed, even if none of them knew it yet. Rebecca woke up slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark pond. Her head felt like someone had been using it for hammer practice, and when she tried to move her arm, a sharp pain shot through her shoulder. She opened her eyes to find herself staring at a ceiling made of rough wooden beams, nothing like the fancy plaster work of her family's house back in Boston. "Easy there, miss. You've been out for 2 whole days." The voice belonged to a man sitting in a chair beside the bed. He was tall and lean, with work-roughened hands and kind eyes that looked like they'd seen their share of worry. His clothes were simple but clean, and he had the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors. "Where am I?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "You're at my ranch. Name's Ben Morrison. Found you after the storm, near what was left of a stagecoach. You remember anything about what happened?" Rebecca tried to think, but her memories felt fuzzy and distant. She remembered being on a stagecoach, yes, but everything after that was a blank. I remember traveling, but I can't remember where I was going or why." Ben picked up the leather satchel from beside his chair. "These were your things. Papers say you're Rebecca Crawford, traveling to Cedar Falls. Ring any bells?" The name felt familiar, like a song she'd heard long ago, but couldn't quite place. "I think so. Maybe My head hurts too much to think straight. That's all right. Doc always said head injuries can mess with memory for a while. Important thing is you're alive? That was some storm, and when I found you, I wasn't sure you were going to make it. A small voice piped up from the doorway. Papa, is the lady awake now? Ben's whole face softened when he looked at the little girl peeking around the door frame. Come on in, Lily. The lady's awake and she's going to be just fine. Lily crept into the room like a shy forest creature, staying close to her father's side. She was a tiny thing, maybe 4 years old, with serious brown eyes and hair that needed brushing. In her arms, she clutched a worn wooden doll. This is my daughter, Ben said, his voice full of pride and love. She's been worried about you, haven't you, little one? Lily nodded but didn't say anything. She just stared at Rebecca with those big, curious eyes. Hello, Lily, Rebecca said softly. That's a beautiful doll you have there. For the first time, Lily smiled just a little. Her name is Annie. She doesn't talk much either. Ben chuckled. Lily's been pretty quiet lately, haven't you, sweetheart? Over the next few days, Rebecca slowly got stronger. Ben had done a good job setting her broken arm, though it would be weeks before she could use it properly. The head injury was healing too, but her memories were still patchy at best. Ben insisted she stay in his room while he slept on the floor in the main room. Rebecca protested, but he wouldn't hear of it. You're hurt, and you're a guest in my house. That's the end of it. She noticed how hard he worked, up before dawn to tend the cattle, then coming in to cook breakfast for her and Lily. He wasn't much of a cook, but he tried his best. The eggs were usually burned, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. But there was something touching about the effort he put in. Lily was a puzzle that Rebecca found herself wanting to solve. The little girl was clearly smart, but she barely spoke above a whisper. She spent most of her time playing quietly by herself or staring at a faded photograph on the kitchen table. That's her mother, Ben explained one evening after Lily had gone to bed. She died when Lily was born. Sometimes I catch her talking to the picture like she's trying to have a conversation. Rebecca's heart ached for the little girl. She must be so lonely. I try my best, but I don't know the first thing about raising a little girl. I can teach her to ride a horse and how to tell when a storm's coming, but the rest of it, I'm lost. As Rebecca got stronger, she started helping around the house. At first, Ben protested, but she insisted she needed to do something useful. She couldn't remember much about her past, but her hands seemed to know how to do things. She could cook better than Ben, and she knew how to mend clothes and organize a household. More importantly, she found herself drawn to Lily. The little girl was clearly hungry for female company, though she was too shy to show it directly. Rebecca started small, sitting nearby while Lily played. Not saying much, but just being present. One afternoon, Rebecca noticed Lily struggling with a simple wooden puzzle. The little girl was getting frustrated, her bottom lip quivering like she might cry. Would you like some help? Rebecca asked gently. Lily looked up at her, then nodded. Rebecca sat down beside her and showed her how to look at the shapes and colors to figure out where each piece belonged. Soon Lily was giggling. As they worked together, "You're really good at this," Rebecca said. "I bet you're smart enough to learn all sorts of things." "Papa says I don't need to learn reading and writing like town kids do," Lily said quietly. "He says ranch work is more important." Rebecca felt a little spark of something she couldn't quite name. "Well, maybe you could learn both." "Ranch work is important, but so is reading and writing. They help you understand the world." From that day on, Rebecca started teaching Lily little things. She showed her how to recognize letters by drawing them in the dirt with a stick. She taught her to count using beans from the kitchen. She made up stories and games that helped the little girl learn without even realizing it. Ben noticed the change in his daughter almost immediately. Lily started talking more, asking questions about everything she saw. She laughed more too, a sound that filled the house with warmth. "I don't know what you're doing," Ben told Rebecca one evening, "but Lily's like a different child. She's coming alive again." Rebecca felt a warm glow at his words. She's a wonderful little girl. She just needed someone to pay attention to her, to help her see how special she is. As the weeks passed, Rebecca found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to milk the cow, tend the vegetable garden, and help with the cooking. Her fancy Boston clothes were replaced with simpler dresses that Ben bought in town. She didn't mind. In fact, she felt more comfortable in work clothes than she ever had in silk and lace. Ben watched her with growing admiration. This woman who had clearly come from a life of privilege never complained about the hard work or simple living. She threw herself into every task with determination. Even with one arm still healing, more than that, she was bringing his family back to life. The house felt like a home again, filled with the sounds of Lily's laughter and the warm presence of a woman who seemed to care about them both. But even as Rebecca grew more comfortable at the ranch, fragments of memory kept returning. She remembered a life in Boston, a family that had lost their money, and a decision to travel west as a mail-order bride. The memories were fuzzy, but they were there. Lurking at the edges of her mind like storm clouds on the horizon, one night she woke up with a start, remembering more than she wanted to. She remembered Thomas Harrington, the man she was supposed to marry. She remembered the contract she had signed, the money that had been sent for her travel. She remembered the desperate circumstances that had led her to leave everything behind, sitting up in bed. Rebecca looked out the window at the peaceful ranch bathed in moonlight. Tomorrow, she would have to tell Ben the truth about who she was and why she was really traveling to Cedar Falls. The thought made her stomach twist with worry. For the first time in years, she had found a place where she felt truly happy and useful. Lily needed her, and if she was honest with herself, she was starting to have feelings for Ben that went far beyond gratitude. But she also knew that her past was catching up with her, and soon she would have to face the promises she had made to a man she had never met. The storm that had brought her to this ranch had been the beginning of something beautiful. But Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that another storm was coming, one that might tear apart the fragile happiness they had all found together. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday morning, sharp and demanding. Ben was out mending fence posts, and Rebecca was in the kitchen teaching Lily how to make biscuits. The little girl's hands were covered in flour, and she was giggling as she tried to roll out the dough. "I'll get it," Rebecca said, wiping her hands on her apron. But when she opened the door, her heart nearly stopped. The man standing on the porch was tall and well-dressed, with perfectly groomed hair and expensive clothes that had never seen a day of real work. His cold blue eyes looked her up and down, with the kind of calculating stare that made her skin crawl. "Miss Rebecca Crawford, I presume?" His voice was smooth but had an edge to it that made her take a step back. Yes, how did you know I was here?" "I am Thomas Harrington, your intended husband." He said the words like he was announcing the weather. "I've been searching for you since the stagecoach accident. The driver's body was found 2 days ago, and I've been tracking down leads ever since." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. All her memories came flooding back at once. The desperate situation back in Boston, her family's debts, the contract she'd signed to marry this man she'd never met, the money he'd sent for her travel expenses, the promises she'd made. "Mr. Harrington, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." He stepped inside without being invited, his eyes taking in the simple ranch house with obvious distaste. "You're late for our wedding, that's all. We'll need to leave immediately to make up for lost time." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her small face covered in flour, still holding the wooden spoon. Thomas looked at her like she was something unpleasant he'd stepped on. "Whose child is that?" "She belongs to the rancher who saved my life," Rebecca said, moving protectively toward Lily. "Mr. Harrington, I need to tell you something. We can discuss whatever needs discussing on the way to Cedar Falls. Go pack your things. We're leaving within the hour." "But sir, I'm still recovering." "From my injuries?" "My arm will heal just fine." "I've waited long enough for a wife, Miss Crawford." "I won't wait any longer." That's when Ben came through the door, his work clothes dusty and his face confused. He took one look at the fancy stranger, and then at Rebecca's pale face, and his expression darkened. "Can I help you with something, mister?" Thomas turned to him with a sneer. "You must be the rancher." I appreciate you caring for my property, but I'll take over from here. Your property? Ben's voice was dangerously quiet. Miss Crawford is my contracted bride. We have a legal agreement. Thomas pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket. All signed and witnessed. She owes me her hand in marriage, and I intend to collect. Ben looked at Rebecca, and she saw the hurt and confusion in his eyes. She wanted to explain, to tell him how she felt about him and Lily, but the words stuck in her throat. Is this true? Ben asked her. Rebecca nodded miserably. I signed a contract. He sent money for my travel. I was supposed to marry him when I reached Cedar Falls. The silence in the room was deafening. Lily looked between the adults, sensing the tension but not understanding what was happening. Well then, Ben said finally, his voice hollow. I guess. There's nothing more to say, Thomas smiled coldly. Exactly. Now, Miss Crawford, gather your belongings. We have a wedding to attend. Over the next hour, Rebecca packed her few possessions with shaking hands. Thomas waited on the porch, checking his pocket watch impatiently. Ben had disappeared to the barn, and Lily sat on her bed, tears streaming down her face. You really leaving? Lily whispered. Rebecca knelt down beside her, fighting back her own tears. I have to, sweetheart. I made a promise before I came here, and I have to keep it. But what about our lessons? What about the stories you tell me? You're such a smart girl, Lily. You'll keep learning and growing. I know you will. Lily threw her arms around Rebecca's neck. I don't want you to go. I love you. Those words broke Rebecca's heart into 1,000 pieces. She held the little girl tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, trying to memorize the feeling of her small arms around her neck. I love you too, sweetheart. So very much. Ben appeared in the doorway, his face like stone. His carriage is ready. Rebecca stood up, her legs feeling weak. She wanted to run to Ben, to tell him that she loved him too, that she wanted to stay and be part of their family. But Thomas was waiting, and she had signed a contract. She had taken his money. She had given her word. Ben, I don't. He held up a hand. You've got a life waiting for you. A good life, with a man who can provide for you properly. That's more than I could ever give you. That's not what I want. What you want doesn't matter now, does it? You made your choice back in Boston. His words stung, but Rebecca knew he was right. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Thomas appeared in the doorway. Time to go. The preacher is waiting. As they walked toward the carriage, Rebecca turned back one last time. Ben was standing in the doorway, his arm around Lily's shoulders. The little girl was crying openly now, and Ben's face was set in hard lines that couldn't quite hide his pain. Goodbye, Rebecca whispered. Knowing they probably couldn't hear her, the carriage ride to Cedar Falls was the longest 2 hours of Rebecca's life. Thomas talked the entire time about his plans for their life together, his successful business, the fine house he'd built. But all Rebecca could think about was the look on Ben's face when he'd called her Thomas's property. You'll find Cedar Falls much more civilized than that primitive ranch, Thomas was saying. I've already hired servants, so you won't have to do any of that manual labor you've been subjected to. I didn't mind the work, Rebecca said quietly. Thomas laughed. Of course you minded it. No proper lady enjoys scrubbing floors and milking cows. You were just making the best of a bad situation. But that was where he was wrong. Rebecca had loved the work, loved feeling useful and needed. She had loved teaching Lily and watching her grow. She had loved the simple pleasures of ranch life, the satisfaction of a job well done. Most of all, she had loved Ben and Lily with a depth that surprised her. She had never expected to find love in a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, that little ranch had become home in a way her family's mansion in Boston never had. The wedding was set for the following week. Thomas had already made all the arrangements, from the church to the reception to the honeymoon trip. Rebecca felt like she was watching her life happen to someone else, but at night, alone in the guest room of Thomas's grand house, she couldn't stop thinking about Ben. And Lily, she wondered if Lily was still crying herself to sleep. She wondered if Ben was back to burning the eggs and making coffee strong enough to strip paint. She wondered if they missed her at all, or if they were already moving on with their lives. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Ben was falling apart. He threw himself into his work with dangerous intensity, taking risks he never would have taken before. He stopped eating regular meals, stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. Lily had retreated back into her shell, refusing to speak above a whisper. She wouldn't touch the books and games Rebecca had left behind. She just sat by the window, staring out at the road as if she was waiting for someone to come back. The neighbors started to worry. Word spread that Ben Morrison was working himself to death, and his little girl was wasting away with grief. But when they tried to help, Ben turned them away with sharp words and cold shoulders. "We're fine," he would say. "We don't need anybody's help." But they weren't fine. They were both drowning, and the woman who had thrown them a lifeline was gone, bound by duty and law to a man who saw her as nothing more than a business transaction. The storm that had brought them together was over, but the damage it left behind was just beginning to show. The wedding dress hung in Thomas's guest room like a beautiful prison. Rebecca stared at it every morning when she woke up, its white silk and delicate lace mocking her with promises of a happiness she knew she'd never feel. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until she became Mrs. Thomas Harrington forever. Thomas had spared no expense. The dress was the finest money could buy, imported from back east. The church was booked, the flowers ordered, the reception planned down to the last detail. Everyone in Cedar Falls was talking about the grand celebration. Their wealthiest bachelor was throwing for his mail-order bride, but Rebecca felt like she was preparing for her own funeral. "You should eat something," said Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper. Thomas had hired to help with the wedding preparations. She set down a tray of fine china and perfectly prepared food that Rebecca couldn't even look at. "I'm not hungry. Bride's nerves, I suppose." Perfectly normal, but Mrs. Peterson's kind eyes showed concern. Rebecca had barely eaten anything since arriving in Cedar Falls, and she was getting thinner by the day. Rebecca walked to the window and looked out at the town below. It was a nice enough place, certainly more civilized than the ranch. There were proper shops, a real doctor, even a small school. Everything a person could want for a comfortable life. So why did she feel like she was suffocating? "Mrs. Peterson," Rebecca said suddenly, "have you ever been to the Morrison Ranch, about 30 miles west of here?" The older woman paused in her tiding. "Can't say I have, dear, but I've heard talk about it in town." "What kind of talk?" Mrs. Peterson looked uncomfortable. "Well, I probably shouldn't say, but folks are worried about that poor little girl out there. Word is she's been poorly since—" "Well, since someone left?" Rebecca's heart clenched. "Poorly how?" "Not eating, not talking. Doc Henderson was out there last week, and he told my sister's husband that the child is just wasting away. And the father, well, he's working himself half to death. Dangerous work, too, they say, like he doesn't care what happens to him." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling sick. She had done this. Her leaving had hurt them both, and there was nothing she could do about it. That afternoon, Thomas took her for a drive around town in his fancy carriage, showing off his property and introducing her to the important people. Rebecca smiled and nodded and said all the right things, but inside she felt empty. "The Henderson place there will be ours someday," Thomas was saying, pointing to a large house on the hill. "Old man Henderson owes me quite a bit of money. When he can't pay, I'll foreclose and we'll have the finest house in the county." "What will happen to the Henderson family?" Thomas shrugged. "Not my concern. Business is business." That evening, as they dined in Thomas's grand dining room, Rebecca tried to imagine spending the rest of her life at this table, listening to him talk about his business deals and property acquisitions. He was wealthy, certainly, and not unkind in his way. But when he looked at her, she saw nothing in his eyes except ownership. "You've been rather quiet lately," Thomas observed, cutting his expensive steak. "I hope you're not having second thoughts." "Of course not," Rebecca lied. "Just nervous about the wedding." "Good, because it would be unfortunate if you were thinking of backing out now. We have a contract, after all. Legal and binding. And I've spent considerable money on this wedding, not to mention the funds I advanced for your travel." The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. Rebecca understood that she was trapped, bound by law and debt to a man who saw her as property he'd purchased 2 days before the wedding. Disaster struck at the ranch. Ben had been working alone, trying to repair a section of fence near the creek. He'd been pushing himself too hard for weeks, taking risks that no sensible rancher would take. But sense had left him the day Rebecca walked out of his life. The fence post was stuck deep in rocky ground, and Ben was using a heavy crowbar to try to loosen it. He'd been at it for hours, sweating in the hot sun, when the bar slipped and came down hard on his leg. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Ben fell to the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He knew right away it was broken, probably in more than one place. "Help!" he called out, but there was no one around for miles. Lily was at the house, probably playing quietly by herself like she always did now. She wouldn't even notice he was missing until supper time. Ben tried to drag himself toward the house, but the pain was too much. Every movement sent fire shooting through his leg. He was losing blood too, from where the crowbar had torn through his pants and into his skin. As the sun started to set, Ben realized he might not make it back to the house at all. If he passed out here, who would find him? And what would happen to Lily? Meanwhile, at the house, Lily waited for her father to come home. She'd set the table for two like she always did, though she barely ate anything these days. The sun was going down, and Papa was never this late. As darkness fell, Lily became truly frightened. She took her oil lamp and went outside, calling for her father. "Papa! Papa, where are you?" Her small voice carried across the empty ranch, but there was no answer. Lily had never been alone in the dark before. She was scared, but she was also smart enough to know something was wrong. Papa would never leave her alone like this unless something bad had happened. She thought about Rebecca, who had taught her to be brave and think for herself. What would Rebecca do? With more courage than any 4-year-old should have to show, Lily saddled up their gentlest horse and rode out to look for her father. It took her nearly an hour, following the fence line by lamplight, but she finally found him. Ben was unconscious, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Lily shook him gently. "Papa! Papa, wake up!" Ben's eyes fluttered open. "Lily, what are you doing here? You didn't come home." "I was scared." Even through his pain, Ben felt a surge of pride in his brave little girl. "I'm hurt, sweetheart. My leg is broken. We need to get help." But who could they call? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and Lily was too small to ride that far alone in the dark. "Rebecca would know what to do," Lily said quietly. The name hit Ben like a physical blow. Rebecca was gone, married to another man by now probably. She had made her choice. "Rebecca's not here anymore, little one. But she loved us, I know she did. Maybe if we asked her to come back?" Ben closed his eyes, fighting against the pain and the hope that Lily's words sparked in his chest. Even if Rebecca did care about them, she was bound by law to Thomas Harrington now. She couldn't help them even if she wanted to, but as he lay there in the dirt, his broken leg throbbing and his daughter's small hand holding his, Ben realized something that should have been obvious all along. He loved Rebecca. Not just for what she'd done for him and Lily, but for who she was. Her kindness, her strength, her gentle way of making everything better just by being there. He loved her. And he'd been too proud and stubborn to tell her so. Now it was too late. Back in Cedar Falls, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She paced her room, the wedding dress seeming to watch her from its hook on the wall. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow she would promise to love, honor, and obey a man she could barely stand to be around. She thought about Ben and Lily constantly, wondering if they were all right, if they missed her even a little bit. Thomas had forbidden her from contacting them, saying it wasn't proper for an engaged woman to correspond with other men. Outside her window, the night was dark and still. But somewhere out there, 30 miles away, the man she truly loved was lying broken and bleeding in the dirt, and the little girl who had stolen her heart was trying desperately to save him. Rebecca didn't know about the accident, but something deep in her heart told her that the people she loved were in trouble, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it. The wedding morning arrived with perfect blue skies and warm sunshine, as if nature itself was mocking Rebecca's misery. She sat at the vanity in Thomas's guest room, staring at her reflection while Mrs. Peterson fussed with her hair. "You look beautiful, dear," the housekeeper said, but her voice carried worry. "Though you're awfully pale, are you feeling well?" Rebecca wasn't feeling well at all. She hadn't slept in 3 days, and the thought of food made her stomach turn. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ben's face when Thomas had called her his property. She saw Lily's tears as she begged her not to leave. "I'll be fine," Rebecca lied. The same lie she'd been telling everyone for weeks. Downstairs, she could hear Thomas giving orders to the servants, making sure everything was perfect for his big day. That's how he saw it. His day, his wedding, his bride. Rebecca was just another acquisition. Like a piece of furniture or a prize horse, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Peterson. Instead, a young man she didn't recognize stepped into the room. He was dusty from hard riding, his face serious and urgent. "Miss Crawford?" "My name is John Miller. I'm a neighbor of Ben Morrison's." Rebecca's heart stopped. "Ben? What about Ben?" "There's been an accident, miss. Ben's hurt bad, and his little girl rode 5 miles in the dark to get help." Bravest thing I ever saw a child do. How badly hurt? Rebecca was already standing, her hands shaking. "Broken leg, maybe worse. He's been bleeding for hours. Doc Henderson is with him now, but ... double quote." John shook his head. "It's not good, miss. And the little girl, she keeps asking for you." Rebecca didn't hesitate. She started pulling off her wedding dress right there, not caring that John quickly turned away. "Mrs. Peterson, I need my riding clothes. Miss Crawford." The housekeeper bustled in, shocked. "What are you doing?" "The wedding starts in 2 hours. There won't be a wedding." "Not today? Not ever?" Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face turning, red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" "Rebecca, put that dress back on this instant." "No." Rebecca pulled on her simple dress and boots, the clothes she'd worn at the ranch. They felt more like her than the silk and lace ever had. "Leaving, you most certainly are not. We have a contract." "You're legally bound to marry me." Rebecca turned to face him, and for the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, her voice was strong and clear. "I'll pay you back every penny you spent. Every cent of travel money, every dollar for this wedding, but I won't marry you." "You don't have that kind of money. Then I'll work until I do. But I'm not staying here another minute while the people I love are suffering." Thomas grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're not going anywhere. John, as a citizen of this town, I order you to stop this woman from leaving." John looked at Thomas with disgust. "I don't take orders from you, Harrington. And any man who'd force a woman to marry him against her will isn't worth the dirt on my boots." Rebecca pulled free from Thomas's grip. "The church is full of people expecting a wedding. Go tell them the bride has come to her senses." She ran from the house, John close behind her. Thomas's shouts followed them, but Rebecca didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The ride to the ranch felt like the longest 30 miles of Rebecca's life. John had brought an extra horse, and they pushed the animals hard, stopping only to rest them briefly. With every mile, Rebecca's fear grew. What if they were too late? What if Ben's injuries were worse than John had said? When they finally reached the ranch, Rebecca's heart nearly broke at what she saw. The place looked abandoned, with tools scattered where they'd been dropped, and no sign of the careful organization Ben always maintained. She ran to the house, where Doc Henderson met her at the door. His face was grim. "How is he?" she asked breathlessly. "He'll live, but it was close. Lost a lot of blood, and that leg is broken in 3 places. He won't be doing ranch work for months, if ever again." Rebecca pushed past him into the bedroom, where Ben lay unconscious on the bed, his face pale as winter snow. His leg was splinted and bandaged, but she could see the pain even in his sleep. "Papa's going to be okay now," said a small voice. Rebecca turned to see Lily standing in the doorway. The little girl looked so tiny and scared, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Oh, sweetheart." Rebecca knelt down and opened her arms. Lily ran to her, and Rebecca held her tight, feeling the child's small body shaking with exhaustion and Fear. I knew you'd come back, Lily whispered. I told Papa you would. I should never have left in the first place, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm so very sorry. Ben's eyes fluttered open, and when he saw Rebecca holding his daughter, he wondered if he was dreaming. Rebecca? She moved to his bedside, still holding Lily. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere ever again. But your wedding, Thomas. There was no wedding. There never should have been. Rebecca took his hand, careful not to jar his injured body. Ben, I have something to tell you, something I should have said before I left. Ben's eyes were growing clearer, the pain medication wearing off. What? I love you. I love you, and I love Lily, and this ranch is the only home I've ever known. I don't care about contracts or money or what's proper. I care about you. Ben stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. But the debt, Thomas said you owed him money. I'll find a way to pay him back. I'll work, I'll sell everything I own if I have to. But I won't spend my life married to a man. I don't love when the man I do love is right here. Before Ben could respond, angry voices outside interrupted them. Through the window they could see Thomas arriving with several men from town, including the sheriff. She's in there, Thomas was shouting. That woman broke a legal contract and owes me thousands of dollars. I want her arrested. Sheriff Williams looked uncomfortable. Now, Thomas, I can't arrest someone for changing their mind about getting married. She took my money under false pretenses. That's theft. Rebecca squeezed Ben's hand. I have to face this. No. Ben tried to sit up, wincing with pain. I won't let him take you. He can't take me. I'm not his property, no matter what any contract says. Rebecca walked outside to face Thomas, her chin held high. Behind her, Doc Henderson helped Ben to the doorway, where he leaned heavily on crutches. Rebecca? Thomas's face was purple with rage. You're coming back with me right now? No, I'm not. You signed a contract. You owe me money. And I told you I'll pay you back, every penny with interest if you want. But I'm not marrying you. The sheriff stepped forward. Ma'am, did you willingly sign an agreement to marry this man? I did. But circumstances have changed. She can't just change her mind. Thomas sputtered. I have witnesses. I have documents. Old Doc Henderson cleared his throat. Actually, Thomas, you might want to think about this real careful like. What do you mean? Well, forcing a woman into marriage against her will, that's not looked upon too kindly by most folks. And threatening her with jail time to make her comply? That sounds an awful lot like coercion to me. Several of the men who had come with Thomas were nodding, their faces showing disapproval. John Miller spoke up. Doc's right. Any man who'd force a woman to the altar isn't much of a man at all. The crowd was turning against Thomas, and he could see it. His face went from purple to white as he realized his reputation in the community was at stake. This isn't over, he said finally. You'll pay me back every cent or I'll take you to court? Fine, Rebecca said calmly. Send me a bill? Thomas climbed back into his carriage and drove away, leaving Rebecca standing in the yard surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. You did the right thing, miss, Sheriff Williams said quietly. A contract signed under desperate circumstances isn't worth the paper it's written on, not when it comes to matters of the heart. As the crowd dispersed, Rebecca turned back to Ben, who was watching her with wonder in his eyes. Are you sure about this? He asked. It won't be easy. The ranch is barely making ends meet, and now with my leg. We'll figure it out, Rebecca said firmly. Together, Lily tugged on her dress. Does this mean you're staying forever? Rebecca knelt down and looked into the little girl's bright eyes. Forever and ever, if you'll have me. Yes. Lily threw her arms around Rebecca's neck. We can have lessons every day, and you can tell me stories, and we can cook together. Ben smiled, the first real smile Rebecca had seen from him since the day she'd left. I love you too, he said quietly. I should have told you before, should have fought for you. You have me now, Rebecca said, helping him back into the house, and I'm never leaving again. Over the following months, Rebecca proved she meant every word. She worked tirelessly to help Ben recover, managing the ranch. While he healed, She started a small school for the local children, which brought in extra money. Slowly but surely, she paid back every penny she owed Thomas. Though it took nearly 2 years, the ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. Ben's leg healed well enough for light work, and Rebecca proved to have a head for business that complemented his knowledge of cattle and land. They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Lily was their flower girl, chattering excitedly and beaming with joy. It was everything a wedding should be, full of love, laughter, and real happiness.